This sort of pain, this psychic pain we're talking about, this spiritual suffering, is not meant to be suppressed, but expressed.
When we see news, you know, because some bad news, like the original COVID virus, was a real issue, killed millions of people, right? So how do we know when it's real or when it's not real? And what do we do when we're in that weird place where we can't, you know,
Philippians 1 talks about discernment. And when it talks about discernment, it specifically, it says, test the things that differ, which means like be able to test things that differ from falsehood and things that differ from facthood. So test the things that differ, but another translation renders that, approve the things that are excellent. Another translation renders that same verse, choose the things that bring contentment.
Yeah.
So when we're watching the news or when we're getting freaked out or when we're catastrophizing, we have to remember to choose the things that bring contentment and to approve the things that are excellent.
That's good.
With the knowledge that so much of media will try to get us glued to the things that are ugly, not praiseworthy, and sometimes not even true. Sometimes true, sometimes not true. But that's why it's so important that we say, I'm gonna think about what's excellent. Now here's, I'm gonna be honest with you.
Yeah.
I tend to be somebody who overthinks, I brood, I will give in to worry, and I know so many people watching this, perhaps you're tuned in right now and you're like, I am worried. I'm worried about the bills. I'm worried about my grandkids. I'm worried about my health. As a millennial, if you have grandkids who are suffering with anxiety, like this is actually one of the big things in our generation. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people right now. We are suffering as a generation.
Is that true?
Second leading cause of death. Second leading cause of death among young people. And so what I want to encourage people in, and this is so important, Bobby, is that when we feel anxious, we can start to beat ourselves up that we're feeling anxious, which makes us more anxious. So something that's been a secret for me to finding inner peace is this verse in Exodus 34. In Exodus 34, verse 6 and 7, that is the most quoted passage in the Bible by the Bible. So what John 3:16 is to the evangelical Christian community, Exodus 34 was to the Jews. And in that passage, it says, God is merciful and he is slow to anger. Now that phrase, slow to anger, it's a Hebrew idiom that literally means long-nosed. Because back in Jewish consciousness, in Hebrew culture, they believed that if you got angry, your nose would flare, your nostrils would flare, which happens in bowls at conquistadors.
Kind of like a proto-Pinocchio type thing.
Yeah, a proto-Pinocchio, only it had nothing to do with lying, it had to do with anger.
Yeah, sure.
So your nostrils will flare and your nose gets red.
Okay.
So their idea was the longer the nose, the longer it takes for you to get mad.
Yeah.
So when they said God, this is one of the most quoted verses, this is the most quoted verse in the Bible by the Bible. God is long-nosed, which means slow to anger. It means it takes him a really long time to get mad. What does that mean? God's patient with me when I'm anxious.
Yeah.
And knowing that helps me to be more patient with myself. Saying, you know what, it's okay that I feel some anxiety. It's okay that I feel beset by worry. It's okay that I watch the news and suddenly I'm wondering what's real. But I can approve the things that are excellent by remembering that God's patient with me so I can be patient with my own process.
What do you think about I think you used this phrase last time, it's in philosophy called the via negativa, which is the idea of removing things, you know, from your learning or from your life or in life. There's so much, they talk about sometimes in communication, noise versus signal. So if I'm on the phone with you and we're talking, there's noise around, there might be ambient noise, there might be fuzziness on the line. That's noise, it's affecting the message, but you learn to ignore it so that I can hear Ben's voice through the phone, and that's the signal.
Yeah.
So it's very often, I feel like a lot of news is just noise. It's not real information, it's sort of, and so I guess one of the questions I have is, I wonder if, should we just turn the news off and like check in once a week? Should we, I mean, I know we want to be missional and reach people. Should we spend less time around worrisome people? I mean, like, are there things in our lives that, I mean, that we think are helping us? And there's a real question. Is it better to be informed, or is it better to be just like checking in from time to time? Like, do you have any advice on that?
Well, I think that it has to be specialized for a person's individual needs and respective personality. So what might be okay for one person, like when I watch the news, that doesn't make me as anxious as going on social media. So there will be times I'll have to fast from social media and have help running it, and there's other times where I'm like, no, it's okay to go on. So I think, is this something that's bringing me anxiety? Is this something that's harming my mental health?
Yeah.
And at this season of life, it's very important to prioritize mental health and to get rid of the noise that we can hear the signal. Now, you can't get away from the noise, though, living in our culture. So how do we decipher the signal from the noise? How do we test the things that are different and approve the things that are excellent, or as Jeremiah was told, to extract the precious from the vile? Well, let me use an example of what's in the news right now, since we're talking about that and trying to find peace in the chaos. Surfside, Florida. There was a building that collapsed. I was just in Miami a week ago and killed all these people. And we see something like that and we think, how could we find peace in a world where something like that happens, where this building collapses and all these people die? What we have to remember is the Bible is relevant and new, even though, take the book of Job. It's the oldest book ever written in literary history. According to Billy Graham, he said it's the oldest book ever written, not just in the Bible, but ever. And in Job, the same thing happened. There was a building that collapsed and killed the people inside. Those were Job's kids. A whirlwind came, caused the building to collapse, and his kids died. That was the end of the story, or pardon me, the beginning of the story. At the end of the story, when God restored to Job all that he had lost, because he always restores the years the locusts have eaten, it says that God spoke out of a whirlwind. Now, the reason that's so big is because the place we suffer most painfully, that's the place where God speaks most powerfully.
Interesting.
So a whirlwind killed his kids and collapsed the building, just like in Surfside, Florida. So too, at the end of the story, God spoke through a whirlwind, because the place we suffer most painfully is the place where God speaks the most powerfully. So even what the enemy or sometimes news agencies might mean to keep us glued to the screen or might mean for our harm, God can actually cut it out with a redemptive edge and bring something beautiful even from those ashes. I want to share really briefly my story and then also share some solutions. So Bobby, we've talked about this before, but my brother and my sister are now in heaven. I've used to have horrible panic attacks. I went through 11 years of chronic depression and I almost committed suicide several times. I would walk up to skyscrapers and walk on the ledge. I freaked out a security guard once who saw me do that. I would take up my friend's motorcycle and try to be a passive victim by just without a helmet and a license riding it as fast as I could at night, maybe sort of hoping that I could passively die. So I didn't do the deed with my own hand. And after getting diagnosed with this, we've talked about it, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, I started thinking I'm never gonna be happy. I would lay in bed and I would see witches' distorted faces laughing at me. Oh. I felt like a devil from hell took a lighter from Hades and lit my brain on fire. So I know what it's like to be not just stuck in a rut or feeling the blues, but just hating being alive.
Yeah.
And so I wanna share a few things that help me. Number one, both Bible and the sciences teach us that your brain can change, that you are not stuck with your psychological equipment. I had a counselor describe it to me this way: your brain is like the bank of a river, and where the river flows, so goes the bank. So there's grooves in the bank based on the flow of the river.
Oh, interesting.
There are grooves in your brain, literal grooves, and your stream of consciousness, your thoughts, are forming those grooves. So if you choose to think about things that you don't even feel, you choose to think about, wait a second, God's answered my prayers before. Wait a second, God's fulfilled promises before. Wait a second, God's healed diseases before. Wait a second, God has provided my needs before. You're actually forming new grooves in your brain, and you can start to reform your brain. So you can take your thoughts captive. But this is a key, and this is a practical tip. It's all about repetition. Regardless of what you feel, you continue to think about God's faithfulness. Think about the manna from heaven, the water from the rock, the Red Sea parting, how God answered my prayers, how he fulfilled my desires, how he gave me every good and perfect gift from above, how he opened doors when I knocked, he answered prayers when I sought, he gave me requests when with thanksgiving I let all my supplications be known to him. He gave me a peace that passed understanding through different difficulties that I've gone through. And when you repetitively choose to drive your thoughts toward this hope that came from heaven, from God, you can actually reframe your pain and retrain your brain to think differently.
Yeah. Okay, so So let's just say in a scenario, I'm sunk and I'm like on the edge, like you were talking about. What do I reach for? Is there a Bible verse I reach for then? Or you're saying, like, what if I haven't done the hard work of the repetitive stuff that you're talking about, and I just find myself gripped by like one of these like crazy experiences you're talking about? I'm sure there's lots of people who are watching that are like, oh, I had something like that too. How do I get out? How do you break free from that and keep yourself from doing something? Or
well, if you're watching this and you yourself, or perhaps your child or grandchild, is going through severe depression, one of the things that helped me the most was therapy and counseling. Now, I don't know what your religious background might be or denomination you're a part of, but in some forms of Christianity, people think that therapy is secular. The fact of the matter is the Bible says, in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. So the more counselors, the better. So in my story, I remember my sister said, Ben, you've been through a lot. Like, it was after a romantic heartbreak, after an 8-year relationship, like I got heartbroken, and I thought after a while, like I was healing, I was fine. My sister's like, you need to go to counseling and start to process this. So I went to therapy. The therapist was a good guy, but it wasn't the right fit. He was basically trying to change my personality to help me. And I remember literally I skateboarded away. I'm like, I'm never doing that again. Sure enough, a few years later, I went through a very, very dark time after my friend killed himself and my brother went to heaven and joined my sister in heaven. And I started like just going through stuff and thinking, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. My sister said, try again with a different counselor. And so I tried another therapist. And this therapist, to this day, I know that this therapist is always there. We actually FaceTime. That's the great thing about technology. I've never met this therapist in person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just over FaceTime. And that has helped me tremendously doing the talk cure, because this sort of pain, this psychic pain we're talking about, this spiritual suffering, is not meant to be suppressed, but expressed. So I just want to share this. Like, there comes a moment where you can't shove it down. Like, you have to talk to somebody about it. Now, not what we were talking about earlier, where you're complaining and remaining rather than praising and raising. I'm talking about when you're really in a severe place, or you have a grandkid, perhaps like me, who went through something very severe. Please go to a counselor. And it might take a few tries, but I just want to encourage you, don't get discouraged if you don't find the right counselor right away. Therapy saved my life. And I know that that's not an insightful or cute answer, or clever, but it's honestly a very practical thing that saved my life.
At TBN, our mission is to use every available means to reach as many individuals and families as possible with the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ.
Thank you for helping make the gospel of grace go around the world.
Without you, we couldn't do it. God bless you.